Minimalists.
I have a small business and work out of my home, and paper is my enemy. I unsubscribe from everything, try to get off contact lists, and have turned everything I can into e-statements. However, I still have the past 7 years of tax returns, documents, receipts, and other types of papers that I don't know what to do with. I tried to go paperless last year for my business, but the app I was using would mysteriously delete images and spending and mileage that I had spent time inputting, so I canceled it because it made me nervous. My question is, how can I go paperless for both my life and business? I get so worried that my computer will crash or I'll have a fire or flood, but I also am not great with technology and don't fully understand backing things up or using the cloud and things like that.
So Ryan, when I hear Emily here, I certainly identify with this, although I see some problems with her problem.
I do.
What do you see?
Well, the first thing I see is she said she's not adept with using some of these things. And, you know, having enough, living a minimalist lifestyle, it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's difficult. And there are some things that you're going to, in her case, there are some things you're going to have to maybe go out of your way and learn how to do.
Right.
So that's my way of saying to Emily here is don't be scared of the technology.
Right.
Embrace it.
Yeah. You and I didn't know how to do it until we knew how to do it.
Exactly. Like go out of your way to give yourself permission to kind of mess up a little bit and have a little bit of a learning curve. I mean, not to the extent of like, obviously we don't want her records getting deleted, but just don't be nervous going into technology. I don't know how else to say it. That's the first problem that I see is that she sounds a little trepidatious to get into the different apps.
And it's
things
understandable
like that.
because it's overwhelming,
100%,
right? And so I want to break down the problem, make it a little bit less overwhelming. And in fact, once we identify what enough is, you won't be overwhelmed at all. Right now, you're overwhelmed because you have more than enough information. Now, Ryan and I are going to share some practical tips with you. We have some articles. We'll put a link to both of them in the show notes. We'll get to those in a moment because there are some practical things you can do. However, it's quixotic to think that I can add some apps and some technology, and by adding more, that's how I'll get down to enough.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought this was such a good question for this episode, because we're not doing a full paper clutter episode, but it's worth at least discussing. Now, let's be clear, Ryan. You and I aren't paperless. We don't have a paper. In fact, here's the ultimate irony. Here's this New York Times article we're going to read from in a moment, or at least we'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's called Gear for a Paperless Home Office. Gear for a Paperless Home Office. I've printed this out on paper.
That's great.
Now, I do that for the podcast for a reason. I don't just want to print things willy-nilly, but Ryan and I have found that having screens between us actually degrades the conversation.
Yeah.
And we're trying to avoid that. And so if I have to print out some paper, which, by the way, is a renewable resource. I've talked to environmentalists. You know, we've interviewed quite a few, and they're like, well, honestly, if you're printing from using regrowth forests, if you actually care about trees, you use paper,
right?
Which seems counterintuitive to me. I'm not completely on board with that yet.
Right.
I don't just like randomly use a bunch of paper, but for this podcast, it makes more sense than having screens that create a barrier for us.
Yeah.
In fact, I often think that our screens are creating all these new barriers. There's a lot of talk about building a wall. We've built walls, and they're digital walls in between all of us. When you go out, you see it in memes all the time now, where it's like people are all family around the dinner table, and they're all just like staring into this really enticing glowing box.
I read a meme. It said something like, "I'll be watching Netflix on the internet." And then I get bored, so I have to see what's going on the little internet.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's like we don't watch TV anymore. We watch the internet on the big internet or the small internet.
Right.
Now we have medium internet.
Right,
It's the Ronnie Chang joke, which is also in Love People Use Things in the technology chapter. He says, it seems like, he's an immigrant, and he said that it seems like every night in America is a contest to see how many screens I can get between my face and the wall.
Yeah.
And he goes through the whole bit, and it's like the TV, and then I've got my laptop and my iPad and my iPhone, and then boom, Apple Watch.
Right. Oh my God.
Yeah, we have all these screens in between us. So what I'm really saying here is, if you have a problem that is not solvable by that you think is solvable by technology, it may be solvable when you better understand the problem. It may be solvable without technology as well.
So let's help Emily understand.
Let's do that. So first off, becoming completely paperless is fine, but if we're renouncing paper, I'm never ever going to use paper again. What does that do? When you renounce something, it forever attaches you to it.
Right.
And so by renouncing paper, what Emily has done inadvertently, and this is why it's so overwhelming to her at first, is she's now attached herself to not just paper, but the idea that I must be paperless. And therefore, any bit of paper is an indiscretion. And I have failed if I bring one Post-it note into my home office.
Yes. So, Emily, just consider yourself paperless-ish.
Paper full.
Paper full.
I mean, you are paper full right now. But here's the thing. What's the big problem if you've gone out of your way to be relatively paperless or reduce the amount of paper that you have, maybe is a better way to put it, a paper reduction. If you have 7 years of tax records because your accountant says you need 7 years of tax records, okay, what's the problem with that? If you have the essential tax records, I don't see a problem with that. I have one file cabinet at home.
Me too.
That has some tax information, has some receipts in there, and then I'll go through there every 90 days and I cull the superfluous information out of there, and anything I don't need gets shredded, and then boom, I'm done. I don't have to spend a ton of time on it, and I don't have to worry about it because I know quarterly I just go through there, extract the things, and then also we have an accountant who actually handles our business paperwork. And so maybe that's an option. I don't know if you have an accountant, but they may be able to store the things for you. So our accountant actually stores our tax information for us, which is really helpful. And they store it in the cloud. It's all backed up and it's secure. And you have to have someone and a system that you trust, but it's okay to outsource some of that trust as well.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind for me is like a QuickBooks type thing where it handles everything. Like you can put taxes in there, you can put receipts in there. And again, Emily, this is going to take, especially if you have 7 years worth of paper, it's going to take some time to go paperless.
Right.
Or to go paperless-ish to reduce your amount of paper. But so with our accountant, yes, like they handle everything, but you don't have to have an accountant to handle everything. You can have an application that handles.
No, we didn't have an accountant until a couple of years ago.
Exactly. And my feeling too, she was talking about things randomly getting deleted. I mean, I don't know what she was using, but there's probably an easier solution than just giving up.
Well, let's go into some of the solutions here. So before, we have a couple articles here. In fact, I'm just going to put a link to this one in the show notes. Gear for a paperless home office. This has some different scanners and different software, etc. I'm not going to spend time reading through the entire article, but I will say that there are different scanners and things out there that once you have understood the complexity of the problem, I'll say one other thing, though, before Ryan gets into his PC Mag article that he has here, and we'll put a link to that one in the show notes as well. But let me just say this, that if paper is your enemy, then you might be fighting the wrong battle. Right? So I wouldn't treat paper as the enemy. And I know you're saying that tongue-in-cheek, Emily, but whenever I think of an enemy, then all of a sudden I feel as though now I have something that is insurmountable. An enemy, it means I have to fight them, I have to battle them. Well, paper is just something I need to scan. I don't need to battle it, right? or shred it. The truth is, most of the things that I'm holding on to can probably be shredded without even scanning it in the first. That's what I realized when I first embraced minimalism. And I was going through those scanning parties. I was like, I was holding on to so much stuff just in case. But then I just shredded it because I knew I was never going to actually need it. Now, you've got an article here from PC Mag. What's it called?
It is called 5 Apps You Need to Go Paperless.
Now, what I like about this, Ryan, is it's not specific apps, but it's like a category of apps, right?
Yes.
So what's the first one?
So the first one is a to-do list app. So there are so many different versions of this. I use my notepad.
I use Apple Notes.
Yeah, to do a to-do list. But there are apps out there that will help you color code and organize them a little different. I mean, you've got to decide what you're most comfortable with.
Evernote is one that a lot of people are familiar with. Sean, you use something that's Google related, right?
I've used
it's called
Google Keep.
Google Keep. Yeah, that's it.
Any.do is a good one.
and any .do, but there's some other there are some other apps in this article as well. What's the second category, Ryan?
Second category is a scanning app.
I also use Apple Notes for that now.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, so Apple Notes, a few updates ago, they added the scanning capability, so you can scan things with your iPhone, and there's a Google equivalent if you have an Android smartphone. If you just have a flip phone, like the gal that I met over at the... Oh, someone just walked into our studio here. I just met a gal over at the grocery store the other day, and she's like, "Hey, minimalist, like, Delilah was her name. She works at the grocery store. She's like, I've been using a flip phone for 3 months now.
Oh, wow.
And she was showing them, like, that's amazing. So then you don't have the scanning capability. So you and I also have like a photo scanner, document scanner that we've used in the past. Before you were able to do it with your phone. Yeah. That's another option as well.
Yeah, super simple to use. Honestly, like I didn't know I could do that in Notes. I'll start using that now, but I use my camera. Like if I need something, I take a picture of it, and then you can easily convert it to like a PDF or something.
Yeah, that's what Notes does for you using your camera. So it's great. What's the next category?
An e-signature tool. This is pretty valuable.
I use DocuSign.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm just thinking about all the things that we've had to sign over the years, and it seems like DocuSign is like pretty much the easiest technology to use.
Yeah, then there are fewer places that are requiring what's called a wet signature. It's still a thing, it's so odd.
It is, yeah.
But if you don't require a wet signature, then having the DocuSign or the equivalent, there's no sponsorship here. You do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But that's just who we use.
For sure. And then there's a file syncing service. That's category number 4.
Okay, so file syncing, like Dropbox is what we use, for example.
Yep.
Google has their version of this as well. Box is another company that does the so basically, let me explain. If my computer were to crash or my home were to burn down, my entire apartment building burned down, everything that's on my hard drive would be destroyed, but it's also backed up onto Dropbox, and it automatically syncs. Dropbox is relatively simple for me, and we pay an annual fee in order to make that work, because you're paying for storage space, basically.
100%. I know Emily said she wasn't comfortable with the cloud, but again, this is one of those things, Emily, if you're not willing to embrace the technology, then you are going to be stuck with a bunch of paper.
Right, and so and that's okay. That's a cost of admission, right?
Of course.
And so there are a couple options here, Ryan. You can have, in fact, I have redundancy, and so it's much safer than if I were just have a bunch of paperwork in my attic, which I don't have an attic, but if it was in my closet and the place burned down, paperwork's gone, and there's nothing I can do about it. There's no way I can. It's not backed up anywhere. Now, if I have it on my hard drive and then the paperwork's shredded, and then my hard drive is destroyed, then same thing as if my house caught on fire. Now, if it's on the hard drive and it's in the cloud, now I have some redundancy. So even if something were to happen to my computer, or if something were to happen in the cloud, I have backup options here.
100%.
And what's the fifth category, Ryan?
The fifth category is a document sharing tool.
So a document sharing tool like what? What are the examples they provide there?
A common way to send digital documents is attach them to an email. That option isn't always ideal. However, because you can't always tell when or if the recipient got them.
Like Google Drive sort of thing.
Yeah, you can use read receipts, but they only work if the recipient hasn't blocked or declined them. Okay.
All right, well, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Enjoy those 5 different, they say 5 apps, right? But really it's just 5 categories to help you go paperless. Or maybe a better way to say it is paper light. If we go paper light, in which Ryan and I are, even though during our podcast, it's by far the most paper heavy part of our week. In fact, I can't think of any time I print anything else except during our podcast, so I can avoid having any screen in this room whatsoever.
Yeah.
And it is calming, strangely, right? But
it is,
by removing those screens, I feel like it's just me and you in this room, and Sean and Jordan, who are naked. It's really strange. I don't know why they do this. Did you enjoy this video? If so, you can listen to full episodes of the Minimalists private podcast, available exclusively on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/theminimalists today. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.